The surprising power of not knowing everything. Do this immediately. What if the greatest power you could ever possess isn't knowledge, but the ability to not know? What if your certainty is not a strength, but a cage? We live in a world that worships answers. From the moment we're old enough to speak, we're trained to have them about who we are, what we want, what's true, what's false. We equate not knowing with weakness, ignorance, even failure. But what if that's the biggest illusion of all? What if the most profound transformations, the most creative breakthroughs, the most authentic lives start with the courage to say, "I don't know"? Let's paint a picture. Imagine a child sitting under the stars, asking questions no one can answer. Why am I here? What happens after we die? What is time? The child isn't trying to be clever. They're experiencing wonder. They're tapped into something ancient and sacred, the mystery of existence. But what happens as we grow up? That wonder is replaced by structure, clarity, definitions. We're told that growing up means knowing more. But Carl Jung once suggested the opposite. That maturity isn't about having more answers, it's about learning to hold questions without needing to resolve them. That's the surprising power of not knowing. It keeps you open. It keeps you human.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
Think about it. When was the last time you truly said, "I don't know," and felt free, not ashamed? We avoid admitting ignorance because we're afraid of being seen as small or incapable. But not knowing is the beginning of every real discovery. The ones who change the world, scientists, artists, inventors, spiritual seekers, they all begin in the unknown. They don't cling to certainty. They walk into the dark with nothing but curiosity and faith. They aren't afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of staying stuck. And this applies to your life right now. You've probably been trained to think you need to know your purpose, your career path, your beliefs, your identity, and you need to know it all now. But here's the truth. Forcing certainty too soon is like closing a book after reading only the first page. You lock yourself into a version of yourself that might not even be real. You become a prisoner of your own conclusions. And most people would rather stay in that prison because it's comfortable than step into the unknown and risk dismantling everything they thought was true. Let me ask you something that might shake you. What do you think you know that might actually be limiting you? What beliefs about yourself, about others, about life feel so certain, so obvious that you've never questioned them? Could those beliefs be the very thing keeping you from growing? Here's where this gets really interesting. And philosophers like Socrates made an entire life out of not knowing. His most famous line, "I know that I know nothing." That wasn't a joke. That was a spiritual posture. It meant that truth lives not in the mind that clings, but in the mind that empties. It's the humility of not knowing that creates space for higher knowledge to emerge. It's like trying to pour fresh water into a cup that's already full of stale coffee. You've got to empty the cup first. But in today's world, we're doing the opposite. We're filling our minds with opinions, hot takes, algorithm-fed certainty. We argue to win, not to understand. We scroll for answers instead of sitting in the silence of our own being. And the more we know, the less we actually see. That's the sickness of modern knowledge. It inflates the ego, but shrinks the soul. So what do? We practice the art of unknowing. We begin to notice our need for control, our addiction to conclusions, and we gently release it. We start to ask questions again, not to find the quickest answer, but to feel the vastness of the question itself. Like, what is this moment trying to teach me? What am I afraid to learn about myself? Where am I pretending to know just to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty? You see, the greatest wisdom isn't something you hold. It's something that holds you. And it only arrives when you're willing to be held by mystery, not mastery. But when you stop trying to dominate life with knowledge and you start listening to life as a teacher, not knowing is not a void. It's a portal and a doorway into something bigger than intellect, into intuition, insight, even transcendence. And the irony is, once you embrace not knowing, you actually start to know things on a much deeper level. Not through facts, but through experience, through presence, through being. So, if you want to change your life, do this. Admit what you don't know. Say it out loud. Feel the fear in your chest and don't run. Sit with it. Breathe into it. Because that space, that silence, that surrender, that is where real wisdom begins. The path of radical curiosity, how questions will save your life. If not knowing is the doorway, then curiosity is the key that unlocks it. But I'm not talking about the kind of curiosity you perform to seem smart in a conversation. I'm talking about radical curiosity, the kind that shatters your assumptions, dissolves your ego, and leads you into places you never expected to go. It's the kind of curiosity that doesn't seek comfort, but truth. And not the easy kind of truth, the kind that rearranges your life. Most people stop asking questions the moment they think they've found an answer. But what if the answer wasn't the point? What if the purpose of a question wasn't to solve something, but to transform the one who asks it? Think of the great innovators, the spiritual sages, the rebels, and the revolutionaries. They weren't held together by what they knew. They were driven by what they longed to understand. Einstein once said, "I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious." That's not modesty. That's a blueprint. Because radical curiosity is not passive. It's not just about gathering information. It's about living in a state of wonder where every moment becomes a doorway into deeper relationship with life. When you stop needing to have all the answers, you start seeing more. You start listening better. You stop reacting and start noticing. Let me ask you something direct. When was the last time you let a question change you? Not just make you think, but make you feel. Make you uncomfortable. Make you reconsider the very foundation of your beliefs. Most people avoid those questions because they threaten identity. But here's the truth: most never hear identity that can't survive a question was never real to begin with. Radical curiosity doesn't just challenge what you know, it challenges who you think you are. And that's where the power is. Because when you start questioning with intensity and sincerity, you begin to separate the noise from the signal. You begin to see which parts of your personality are authentic and which were installed by others without your consent. You begin to see that maybe you've been living someone else's life, a life shaped by inherited beliefs, cultural scripts, and unexamined fears. And suddenly the question, "Who am I?" isn't just a philosophical cliché. It becomes a living, breathing fire in your chest. But here's the catch: curiosity takes courage, real courage, because questions lead you into unknown territory. They don't promise safety. They don't guarantee clarity. Sometimes they make things more confusing before they bring light. But that confusion is sacred. It's the compost of transformation. Just like a seed must break open before it can grow, your mind must break open too. And that cracking, yes, it's painful, but it's also the beginning of liberation. Radical curiosity also requires humility. Hence, a lot of people pretend to be curious, but they're really just searching for confirmation. They ask questions with a hidden agenda to prove they're right, to reinforce their worldview, to stay in control. But real questions don't serve control. They serve truth. And truth doesn't care about your ego. It doesn't care about your brand. It only reveals itself to those who are willing to let go. So here's the practice. Start asking better questions. Not just what should I do, but what am I not seeing? Not just what's wrong with them, but what part of me is being triggered. Not just why is this happening to me, but what is life trying to show me through this? These are dangerous questions. They can flip your world upside down. But they can also save your life by finally making it yours. Because the truth is, most people aren't living. They're performing. They're checking boxes. They're chasing answers that were never meant for them. But you, if you're still watching this, if you're still listening, you're not most people. You're ready. You're on the path. You've already begun. And that path, the path of radical curiosity, doesn't lead to a final answer. It leads to a deeper version of you, a version that's not afraid to ask, not afraid to grow, not afraid to not know. And that version is waiting. And you'll meet them not in the moment you declare what's true, but in the moment you dare to ask what else could be. The illusion of certainty. Why clarity can be a trap in disguise. We crave clarity, like a starving man craves food. We want answers, direction, purpose, meaning wrapped up in clean, sharp language that makes sense of the chaos. And there's nothing wrong with that desire. It's human. But clarity, when pursued too quickly or held too tightly, becomes a trap. It gives the illusion of control, of safety, of knowing where you stand. But often it stops you from growing. It freezes you in a version of reality that feels solid but is secretly hollow. Carl Jung warned us that the psyche is not built for absolute clarity, it's built for depth, for paradox, for mystery. And when we try to force clarity, we flatten the very soul we're trying to understand. Think about how often we rush into conclusions not because they're true, but because they relieve our discomfort. We label a feeling depression instead of exploring our grief. We call someone toxic instead of investigating our boundaries. We say this is who I am not because it's authentic, but because it's familiar. But real transformation doesn't happen in certainty, but it happens in the messy, terrifying, sacred space before clarity, in the disorientation, in the darkness, or in the waiting. And most people don't want to wait, they want instant answers. But what if the waiting is the answer? Here's the paradox: clarity, when earned slowly, is powerful. But clarity that comes too fast is usually borrowed from parents, from media, from ideology. It's not yours, even if you shout it from the rooftops. And that's the danger. You build a life, a career, a relationship on a foundation that was never true to begin with. But then one day, it all falls apart and you think you've failed. But maybe that collapse was your first act of honesty. Maybe the breakdown is the breakthrough. Let me ask you something radical. What if the clarity you're chasing is actually keeping you small? What if the need to define everything, to know who you are, what you believe, what's next, is just a defense against the unknown? What if the unknown isn't your enemy, but your evolution? Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And how do we make the unconscious conscious? Not by forcing answers, by being willing to sit in the fog, by letting the questions breathe, by trusting that there is wisdom in confusion, that sometimes your soul is rearranging itself in ways your mind can't yet understand. This isn't about rejecting clarity forever. It's about learning to live without needing it every second. It's about trusting the process of becoming more than the need to define who you are. Because you are not a fixed idea, you are a river shifting, expanding, deepening. And the more you try to lock yourself into a label, the more you dam the flow of your life. Here's a visual. Imagine you're lost in a forest. You can panic, demand a map, and take the first path you see. Or you can pause, breathe, listen to the wind, notice the patterns, feel the ground beneath your feet. You may not have a map, but you begin to know the forest. That's the difference between false clarity and embodied wisdom. One gives you a quick exit, the other gives you belonging. So if you feel lost right now, good. Stay there. Don't rush. Don't label. Let the fog teach you. Let yourself unlearn. Let yourself be rewritten by life, not just your ideas about it. Because underneath your craving for clarity is something deeper, the desire to feel safe in your own being. And that safety doesn't come from knowing, it comes from trusting that you are allowed to not know. And in that space, something miraculous happens. You begin to see more, feel more, be more. And that's when life starts to speak, not in answers, but in symbols, in synchronicities, in dreams, in the quiet voice inside that says, keep going. There's more. The wisdom of emptiness, how letting go makes you limitless at some point on the journey, after you've let go of needing to know, after you've surrendered your obsession with clarity, after you've allowed your questions to breathe, you arrive at a strange, silent place. It's not full of answers. It's not bursting with revelation. It's just empty. And this is where most people panic. We're conditioned to believe that emptiness is failure, that silence is absence, that stillness is stagnation. But what if this emptiness is not a void, but a womb? What if it's not the end of knowing, but the beginning of being? The wisdom of emptiness is one of the most ancient and profound truths across all mystical traditions. The Buddhists call it sunyata, the sacred void. Taoists refer to it as the space between things, the uncarved block, the origin of all form. Jung saw it too, in the deep unconscious, in the place where all archetypes dissolve and reform. Emptiness is not nothingness. It's potential, infinite, raw, unshaped potential. And only in this space can something new be born. Think about it. Every masterpiece begins with a blank canvas. Every symphony begins in silence. Every transformation begins with letting go of what no longer fits. But most of us are terrified to be empty. We cling to ideas, identities, routines because they give shape to our world. Even if that shape is suffocating. Even if it's built on lies, letting go feels like death. And in a way it is. But it's the kind of death that makes space for new life. Let me ask you something vulnerable. What are you still carrying that you know you've outgrown? What beliefs, roles, relationships, habits are you holding on to not because they serve you, but because they're familiar? What would happen if you released them and didn't immediately replace them with something else? This is the ultimate invitation to become nobody for a while, to dissolve into openness, to strip away everything you're not until only your essence remains. No labels, no performance, just presence, just breath, just you. And in that space, you start to notice something incredible. Without all the noise, without all the striving, without all the pretending, you are still here, fully alive, fully enough. That's the paradox. You become limitless the moment you stop trying to be more. You expand the moment you stop filling every gap. You grow when you finally allow space for the unknown to enter. Emptiness doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something real is finally allowed to. So here it is. The surprising power of not knowing everything isn't just about philosophy. It's about freedom. It's about living from the inside out. It's about trusting that life is not a puzzle to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And the more you let go, the more you receive. The more you release, the more you become. You don't need to know everything. You just need to return to the place where knowing begins. And that place is silence.